Some people leave us and we never truly understand why. Their deaths are sudden, unexpected, and sometimes they leave behind more questions than answers. But what if there's more to their passing than we can see? What if they leave behind a secret, something they didn't get to share while they were alive? But his sudden death, a death that made no sense to anyone, left a hole in our hearts. There was no explanation, no reason, just the shocking news that he was gone. But months later, something happened that changed everything. My uncle returned. Not in the way you might think, not as just a memory or a distant thought. He came back as a presence, something no one could deny. And with his return came a sense of unfinished business. My uncle names is Richard Bruce. He was one of the kindest people I ever knew, always ready to help others and never raising his voice in anger. I remember how he would walk into a room, and it would suddenly feel brighter, as if his presence carried a special kind of light. As a child, I loved being around him. He had a way of making everything feel exciting, even the simplest things. If he was telling a story, we would all gather around, waiting eagerly for what would happen next. His voice was calm, but it held a power that made us listen. He told stories about his own childhood, about lessons he had learned, and sometimes even funny tales that made us laugh until our stomachs hurt. My uncle was more than just a kind man. He was a teacher, a guide, and someone who always looked out for us. He didn't stand in a classroom with a blackboard and books, but he taught us in ways that made learning feel natural. Through his stories and the way he lived his life, he showed us what was right and what was wrong. Every evening after a long day's work, he would gather us around and tell us stories. Some were about his own childhood, filled with lessons about hard work and honesty. Others were stories about people who made wise or foolish choices and the results of their actions. But no matter what the story was, there was always something to learn. If he told us about a man who was greedy and lost everything, he wasn't just telling a tale, he was teaching us about contentment and gratitude. If he spoke of someone who worked hard and helped others, he wanted us to understand the value of kindness and dedication. He believed that knowledge was one of the greatest gifts a person could have. He encouraged us to ask questions, to think carefully before making decisions, and to always be truthful. When we made mistakes, he corrected us gently, never in anger, but with patience. He wanted us to understand why something was wrong, rather than just being afraid of getting in trouble. But he wasn't just our teacher, he was also our protector. If we were scared of the dark or worried about something, he was always there to reassure us. If we got into trouble outside, he was the one who defended us and made sure we were safe. He made us feel secure, like nothing bad could happen as long as he was around. Despite all this, he never let his responsibilities wear him down. He worked hard every single day to provide for his family. He would wake up early in the morning and return home tired, yet he never complained. He believed in doing his best, not just for himself, but for everyone who depended on him. My uncle was not just a good man. He was a man who understood the meaning of love and responsibility. He believed that family was one of the greatest blessings a person could have, and he cherished his with all his heart. I still remember the day he got married. The happiness on his face was something I will never forget. He had always been a joyful person, but on that day, it was as if his heart was overflowing. He was proud to call his wife his own, and he treated her with so much love and care. Marriage did not change him in a way that made him distant from the rest of us. If anything, it made him even more caring. He now had more responsibilities, but he carried them with pride. He wanted to give his wife the best life possible, and he did everything to make sure she was happy. He never spoke harshly to her, never made her feel unimportant. Instead, he showed her love in the little things, helping her when she was tired, making sure she had everything she needed, and always putting her happiness first. Then the greatest joy of his life arrived, the birth of his son. I have never seen him as proud as he was the day his child was born. He held the baby in his arms, his eyes shining with happiness. He promised to be the best father he could be, and he kept that promise every single day. No matter how busy he was, he always made time for his son. He would come home from work, tired and exhausted, yet still lift the boy onto his shoulders and play with him. He would teach him little things, how to tie his shoes, how to be kind, how to respect others. Even though the child was still small, my uncle knew that every moment spent with him was important. I often watched him with his son, and I saw something special, a deep, unshakable love. He was not just a father in name, he was a father in action. He guided, protected, and cared for his boy with all his heart. If the child cried, he was the first to comfort him. If his wife was tired, he helped without hesitation. His family was his world, and he did everything he could to keep them happy. The morning of my uncle's death was just like any other. Nothing seemed strange or different. He woke up early, just as he always did, and got ready for work. Before he left, he kissed his wife on the forehead, a small gesture of love he never forgot. She smiled, telling him to take care of himself. He nodded, picked up his bag, and stepped out of the house. I remember watching him walk away, never thinking that this would be the last time I would see him alive. The day went on as usual. His wife prepared dinner, expecting him to come home at the usual time. His son played, waiting for his father to return so they could spend the evening together. No one had any reason to worry, but as the hours passed, something felt off. 4 o'clock came, and my uncle was not home. Then it was 5, then 6. At first, his wife tried to stay calm. Maybe he had to finish something at work. Maybe he got delayed by traffic. As the evening stretched on, the worry in the house grew heavier. At first, we all tried to stay calm. Maybe his phone battery had died. Maybe he had been caught up in work. Maybe he was on his way home. These were the things we told ourselves, but deep down, we knew something was wrong. His wife sat on the couch, holding her phone tightly, her fingers trembling as she redialed his number for the 10th time. Each time there was nothing, just silence. No ringing, no answer, no message. Tears began to fill her eyes, but she wiped them quickly, as if trying to push away the terrible thoughts creeping into her mind. His little son, unaware of the fear in the room, sat near the door waiting for his father to walk in. "Maybe Daddy is bringing me something special today," he said cheerfully, kicking his small legs back and forth. His mother forced a smile, but her eyes were red, her breathing uneven. By 7 p.m., she could no longer sit still. She began pacing, stopping only to check her phone. The sound of each passing car made her heart jump. But every time she ran to the window, it was never him. Other family members tried to reassure her. Maybe there was an emergency at work. Maybe he had stopped to help someone. But no one truly believed these words anymore. By 8 p.m., the panic had set in. His wife's face was pale. She clutched her hands together as if in silent prayer. "He has never done this before," she kept repeating. "Something is wrong." The rest of us tried calling his friends, his co-workers, anyone who might have seen him. But no one knew where he was. No one had spoken to him since he left work. It was as if he had disappeared into thin air. By 9 p.m., the house was silent except for the sound of his wife crying softly. The fear had become unbearable. We sat together, waiting for a call, for a knock on the door, for any news, good or bad. And then finally the phone rang. But the news we received was not the one we had been praying for. But the moment she answered, her face changed. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Then a sharp cry escaped her throat, a sound so filled with pain that it sent chills through my body. Her legs gave way beneath her, and she collapsed onto the floor, the phone slipping from her hand. The rest of us rushed to her, snatching up the phone. The voice on the other end was calm, but the words that followed shattered everything. They had found my uncle, but he was not coming home. His lifeless body had been discovered by the roadside. No car accident, no sign of struggle, no explanation. Just gone. The news hit like a thunderclap. No one spoke. No one moved. It felt as if time itself had stopped. How could this be real? He had left that morning full of life, full of plans, promising to be back by 4. And now he was gone. His wife screamed his name over and over, as if calling him back from wherever he had gone. His little son, still too young to understand, clung to her, frightened by the cries but not knowing why. The rest of us stood frozen, unable to process the truth. It made no sense. How could a man who was perfectly fine in the morning end up dead by night? What had happened? Had someone hurt him? Had he fallen ill? Why was he alone? Why was there no explanation? A part of me refused to believe it. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe they had found someone else. Maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance he would walk through that door. But what happened next is the more shocking revelation concerning his death. The days that followed were filled with a sorrow so deep that it felt like the air itself was heavier. My uncle's house, once filled with laughter and warmth, had become a place of unbearable silence. His wife was completely broken. She barely spoke, barely ate. She sat in the same spot for hours, staring at nothing, her eyes swollen from crying. Sometimes she would whisper his name as if expecting him to answer. Other times she would suddenly burst into sobs, clutching her chest as if the pain was too much to bear. His 6-year-old son didn't fully understand what had happened. At first he kept asking, "When is Daddy coming back?" But when no one answered, when he saw his mother's tears and the sadness in everyone's eyes, he stopped asking. Instead, he just sat quietly in the corner, holding his father's old shirt, refusing to let go. Months had passed since my uncle's death, yet the pain still felt fresh. Life had moved on for the world outside, but inside his home, time seemed to have stopped. His wife and son still lived there, but the house was no longer the warm, welcoming place it used to be. It was quiet, too quiet. One evening I decided to visit. As I approached the house, a strange feeling settled over me. The air felt heavier, as if the house itself carried the weight of sorrow. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the walls. Even before I knocked on the door, I felt something, an eerie stillness, a presence I couldn't explain. Stepping inside, nothing had changed. His shoes were still by the door, his favorite chair untouched. His tools lay exactly where he had left them. His scent, though faint, still lingered in the air. It was as if he had just stepped out for a moment and would return at any time. But he wouldn't. His wife greeted me with a tired smile, her eyes still carrying the sadness that had never left. She spoke softly, as if raising her voice would disturb something unseen. His son sat on the floor, hugging an old jacket that had once belonged to his father. I was sitting there scrolling through my phone. But for some reason, in that moment, a strange impulse washed over me. I don't know why I felt it, but it was as if my hand had a mind of its own. Without even thinking, I swiped over to the camera app. My thumb hovered for a second, and then I turned the camera towards the room, almost as if I was capturing a moment for no particular reason. I aimed the lens across the space, casually snapping a few photos, just the familiar surroundings, nothing special. But then something caught my eye. In the viewfinder, something in the corner of the room seemed off. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, maybe a shadow or a blur from the phone's lens. But as I zoomed in, my stomach tightened. The photo revealed something I hadn't seen with my own eyes, something that shouldn't have been there. A shape, a faint, almost transparent figure standing near the doorway. I blinked. I looked at the screen again, and it was still there. A ghostly outline, almost like a shadow, but too distinct to be dismissed as a trick of the light. My heart began to race. I didn't want to believe it, but the realization hit me hard. The figure wasn't just a blur, it was my uncle. When I try to look with my eyes, I can't find or see him. But when I looked at the image on the camera, I have him captured. Then I heard a faint sound, a soft creak, as if someone had just stepped into the room. The moment I heard the soft creak, my body tensed. It came from the hallway, the one that led to my uncle's old room. I turned my head slowly. My breath caught in my throat. The house was quiet, yet something about that silence felt unnatural, as if I was no longer alone. A chill filled the air, brushing against my skin like an unseen hand. The warmth of the house had faded, replaced by a cold that settled deep into my bones. My uncle's wife and son sat nearby, unaware of the change in the atmosphere. But I felt it. I couldn't ignore it. Then I heard it again, a faint whisper, so soft that I almost thought I had imagined it. It wasn't clear, just a hushed sound, like someone speaking from far away. My heart pounded. I wanted to convince myself it was the wind, the settling of the house, anything normal. But deep down, I knew better. The feeling of being watched grew stronger. I glanced toward the hallway again, and that was when I saw a shadow. It wasn't a trick of the light. It wasn't my imagination. A dark shape moved ever so slightly in the dimness of the corridor, standing just beyond the doorway. It was tall, still, familiar. My breath hitched. The air around me felt heavier, pressing against my chest. I wanted to call out, but my voice refused to work. My body remained frozen, caught between fear and disbelief. The shadow didn't move closer, nor did it disappear. It just stood there as if waiting. Deep inside, I knew what it was, or rather, who. Then slowly the shadow shifted, a step forward, then another. And as it emerged into the dim light of the living room, my heart nearly stopped. It was my uncle. He stood near his old chair, the very spot where he used to sit and laugh, where he once told stories and held his son in his lap. But now he was different. There was something hollow about him, something distant. His body was faint, like a figure made of mist and moonlight. His face, so familiar, yet so ghostly, held an expression I couldn't understand. His eyes, they weren't angry, nor frightening. They were filled with sorrow, with longing, with something that felt heavier than words could describe. It was as if he knew what had happened to him, as if he understood the pain he had left behind. A cold shiver ran through me. My hands trembled, my throat dry. I wanted to say something, to call his name, to ask if it was really him, but no words came out. He didn't move closer. He didn't speak. He only stood there looking at me, looking at the house he had left behind. I stood there, frozen, my heart racing in my chest. The moment my uncle's ghost had appeared before me, everything felt so real, so tangible, that I could almost reach out and touch him. But just as quickly as he had come, he was gone. 1 second, he was standing by his old chair, those sorrowful eyes gazing at me with a quiet understanding. And then, in the blink of an eye, the room felt empty again. The shadow in the hallway, the cold air, the chill in my bones. Everything returned to its original stillness. It was as if time had frozen, and I was left in the silence of something that had just been, but was no longer. I glanced around the room, trying to collect my thoughts, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Even as I stood there, the questions kept swirling in my mind, unanswered and unsettling. What had really happened to him? Why had he died so suddenly, so unexpectedly? His death had never made sense. No car accident, no illness, just a man found lifeless by the roadside. And even now, months later, the mystery of it all lingered. Had his death been an accident or something more? Was there a reason he had been taken from us so soon? I couldn't help but wonder if his spirit was restless, if he had returned to the house to answer the questions he had never been able to speak in life. Maybe there was something he needed us to know, something he couldn't leave behind. But then, the bigger question remained. Had he ever truly left? The house felt different now. Every time I stepped inside, I felt that presence again, the strange, comforting weight of something that didn't quite belong, yet felt so familiar. I couldn't shake the feeling that my uncle was still there, somehow watching over his family, waiting for something, waiting for us to understand. Maybe he had returned because he couldn't rest until his family knew the truth. Or maybe he had returned because he was still attached to the house, still longing for the life he had once known. I didn't know if he'd ever come back again, or if the house would return to its quiet, empty state. But a part of me hoped that he would, hoped that one day he would reveal the answers we had been searching for. Until then, all I had were the memories. Perhaps one day, the answers would come, but for now the mystery of his death, in his return, would remain.